Good afternoon, friends. Stephen Ben-Nun here with Israeli News Live, and I've got a very special message I want to share with you guys here on my Patreon channel. This is an exclusive just for you guys. I won't be putting this public anywhere else. It's a story about Ted Bundy, and you're going to get to hear some things that have never before made it to the light of day about the case of Ted Bundy, excuse me. And the infamous serial killer that has been accused of killing upwards to 100 women. Now, he only confessed to 30 women before being put to death in Florida's electric chair. I believe that was in 1989. But this story has touched our own family on multiple levels. Not that any of my family were ever victims, but I've shared with you before, my aunt, her name is Debbie, my mother's sister, almost became one of his last victims. Right here, and in fact, let me pull up a map to share that with you here. Here in Pensacola, Florida, and I'm not in Pensacola, Florida. Whoop, I still did it right. In Pensacola, Florida, this is where Ted Bundy was actually captured at, and I'm going to zoom in for you. Here we are. There's Cervantes right there. We're looking for W Street, and we're going to go ahead and go with a topical view. Kind of find it interesting. The video I have up, we'll go back to that video here in just a moment, but it is not the actual. Maybe I should go to the regular map just so I can find it easier that way before we get it. Okay, here we go, Cervantes. And we are going into, I need to get to where W Street comes down to Cervantes, not Mobile Highway, not that far over. And we're going to go to Gadsden. There's Jackson Street. There's Gadsden right there. All right, now we're getting into the right area there. And that should be W Street right there. It's not showing that for me. Let me go to the topical view. And I can easier find out as I zoom in down on there. Yep, here we are right there. My mother actually lived in this house right here when I think my grandfather built it when she was 16 years old. And here we are on W Street here. It's a little 4-lane highway there. Used to be my great-grandmother's house. Susie was sitting right here. And this place where it says Taste of Jerusalem used to be a restaurant called Oscar's. Went to Oscar's many, many, many times in my life, growing up, breakfast, etc. And this is where, in a little alley back in behind Oscar's, is where Ted Bundy was parked with his headlights out and stuff like that when he raised the suspicion of the Pensacola Police Department. And of course, they follow him up W Street, going northwards there on W Street. And they got past, I believe it was Catholic High School, which is further up this direction here. In fact, yeah, a good bit on up here. Here we go. This is Catholic High School right in this area here when he finally pulled over Ted Bundy and the altercation began. And of course, began his final days of arrest. And never got free again. Of course, we know he escaped twice out of custody. And Ted Bundy, that was, I think, in Colorado, he escaped. But he did a string of gruesome murders across the nation. And like I said, the story kind of touched my own family on multiple levels. One was my aunt, because like I said, she would have been his last victim had my grandfather not intervened. She was actually, there was a fence. This little building right here was an air conditioning shop that my grandfather built initially many, many years ago. And of course, there was a fenced in area here. Back in those days, I believe in that time period, my great-grandmother's house may have still been standing. I don't know if it was tore down as of yet. But Ted Bundy came to the fence there at the backyard. So he would have crossed right in behind the air conditioning shop there and was talking to my Aunt Debbie at the time. That was back in 1978. So let's see, in 78, I would have been 12 years old. My aunt, I think she's 11 years older than I am. So she would have been about 23 years old at the time. And of course, she was blonde, curly hair, very pretty girl. And My grandfather saw him talking to his daughter at the fence, and he proceeded to make sure that he went in a different direction and ran him off. Thank God for my grandfather being that type of astute father, even with my aunt being 23 years old. But at any rate, that was one of the ways that it kind of we ran into this issue. And then on top of it, as you're going to see here in a little bit here when we play the footage here of Ted Bundy here in just a moment, you will actually get to see the car that he was driving, a little Volkswagen that he had stolen. My aunt had seen Ted on a back street when she was out walking the day before, doing a very inappropriate act. We'll just say that. She caught him in the act of doing something there, and she said really grossed her out that she saw that, and but that was something that had happened the day before. And then on top of it, once he was arrested and he was being interrogated by Norm Chapman, the investigator that was assigned to Ted Bundy. Norm Chapman ended up being my professor at Pensacola Junior College when I went through rookie school. He was my professor of criminology. And so I got to hear a lot about the story from Norm. And then to top it all off, my Uncle Wes was a investigator at Pensacola Police Department. He was assigned of checking the credit cards that Ted Bundy was using, the car that he was using stolen. So I knew it from that aspect. And then, of course, in 1983 to 1991, I worked with people there in that colorful three-letter agency. And I knew a lot of the story of Ted Bundy from there. Now, I'm going to have to say alleged as we do this on some of the things I'm going to share with you. Of course, with my aunt, that's not alleged. I know that happened. I know the story behind it. I've heard it for years in our family there, that she was nearly the last victim that he had because he was trying to pick her up. That was what he was doing, trying to get her to go somewhere with him. And, so I thank God that my grandfather stepped in on that. She's still living to this day, a wonderful soul, and I love her dearly, along with my Aunt Charlotte, her sister as well. My Aunt Charlotte was married. And the funny thing is, my Aunt Charlotte also lived in that area not far from where my grandparents lived, only maybe, about 10 blocks away. Let me play a little clip here. It's kind of interesting. They're showing this picture in the beginning, and I'm thinking to myself, where in the world did they get this picture from? This is not Pensacola. It must be Tallahassee. But let me play a little clip here for you.
February 15th, 1978, somewhere around 1:30 a.m. in the morning, while on patrol with the Pensacola Police Department, I noticed a Volkswagen Bug coming
there it
out
is.
of the
That was a
alleyway
Volkswagen. My aunt actually saw Ted in.
No headlights.
Now, David Lee, my Uncle Wes knew David very well. He knew Norm Chapman very well. He's spent his whole life in law enforcement here. Also worked for University of West Florida, was a chief of police there. Chief deputy of Santa Rosa County. So a long history of law enforcement in my family here. And so, like I said, he knew all these guys as well. And what's interesting, my uncle said to me, I actually talked to him a little bit about this story this morning. We're going back through this once again. And he did tell me that, he said, Norman could have, and the same thing with David Lee, he said, could have been very famous people and made a lot of money from this story, but neither one of them ever chose to do that, especially Norm Chapman. Even David Lee, my Uncle Wes told me that Ted Bundy actually said to him, he said, "You have no idea, but I'm about to make you famous." And this was before he ever revealed who he was. Listen in.
I came up behind him and activate my blue lights. Same time I'm running the tag, and the tag come back as a stolen vehicle. I didn't have a backup anywhere close by. There was only 3 of us working in the entire city of Pensacola that night. I got him out of the car and had him laid on the pavement. He kept saying, "Officer, what's wrong? Officer, what's wrong?"
Well, initially, when I was placing the handcuffs on him, he kicked my feet out from under me and struck me with a handcuff that had been placed on one wrist. And, of course, knocked me off my feet, and that's when it started.
I was chasing him all.
As I listen to the story a little bit here, one of the things that I think back about as well is James Hallman. James Hallman I never asked James about it growing up, but James was my father's best friend from school, and him and his wife Diane. James was a lifelong Pensacola police officer as well. Also worked back during those days. I remember as a little boy getting to ride on a police motorcycle, Pensacola police motorcycle, back when, probably about 1969, 1970. And I never got to ask him about the case there, but I am sure with Pensacola being as small as it was, everybody knew everything about the story there. I didn't know David Lee personally. The only one, like I said, that I knew in the story other than my uncle was Norm Chapman. So let me kind of, we'll go and move forward with it.
So forth. Well, he turned, and all I seen was a nickel and thought it was a gun. So I leveled down and fired. So I said, well, my God, I've killed him.
And when I went to see if he was shot and been down, he grabbed my wrist, and we had a struggle for control of my revolver.
And it's a heavy pistol. And when I broke it away, swung and slapped him on the cheek. And if you see pictures right after the suspect was arrested, there's a big bruise on the side of his cheek, and that was from my pistol barrel.
Yeah, if you notice, his face swelled up even after that. I assume that was his public defender that was hired with him as well. Let me take it on over to Norm Chapman. Here we go right here. This is Norm. This is the way I remember Norman as well myself back during the days when I was in rookie school there, and he was our criminology professor. I forget exactly what part of criminology we were learning from Norm. I do remember Norm telling us that he did a little psychological game with Ted, and it had something to do with pudding, because he would ask him if he wanted a Coke or something, if he could get him something to drink. Because you got to remember, as an investigator, his job was to get the information out of him, find out who he is and what he had done. In fact, it was Norm Chapman that got him to plead guilty to the death of the 12-year-old girl that ended up getting the conviction of the death penalty on Ted Bundy. And but Norm Chapman, my uncle told me that one thing that Norm and Ted Bundy had in common is they were both Mormons. And I'm not here to take sides on religious views or anything. And he said there was actually two things that they both had in common. Now, Norm, he was, I won't mention where he's actually from. I do know, but I don't want to mention that for his own safety and things like that. We all love Norm in rookie school. Wonderful man. As far as I know, Norman is still living to this day. But Norman, he was, I would say, the biggest teddy bear you ever met. He was a big man, but he was just as kind and gentle as you couldn't imagine a more kinder man than he was. He did became chief police of Pensacola as well, I think in 1995, somewhere around that time frame. And but my Uncle Wes told me, he said there was one thing that was similar, but yet to the opposite poles. I want to make sure I stress that, to the opposite poles between Norman and that of Ted Bundy. And he said that on the outside, they both had the appearance of a certain type of individual. Norman seemed very common, laid back, just a country, sassafras kind of guy that, from Northwest Florida, that didn't just seem to be just a common guy. But he said the Norman inside of that body and behind that personality that people knew was a very, very intelligent man. And he said Norman was so humble with the way he was, you didn't see that side of him. He said, but he was smart, and he knew how to interrogate his client, or in this case, his prisoner. And this is the reason why he got that information out of Ted Bundy. In fact, Ted Bundy never really wanted to talk to anyone but Norman Chapman, even after he was transferred to Tallahassee. Norman actually told us that when we were in rookie school, he said Ted Bundy had actually said to him that when they finally found out who he was, and I think my Uncle Wes was part of that, because tracing the credit cards, finding out it was stolen, finding out who it really was. Not that he found out his actual identity, But Ted Bundy, well, actually what it was, Wes told me that Ted was given 2 hours to make any phone calls that he wanted to make, and then he would confess who he actually was. But they knew that he was not the one that was on the cards or the stolen car. They had already found that out through Wes's investigation. But Norman said that Ted told him when they were transferring him to Tallahassee, he said, had they left me here and allowed you to be the one to do the interrogation, he said, I would have confessed every murder I ever did to you, Ted. He said, but I'll take most of it to my grave. I always thought that was interesting, and I never forgot that my whole life. Now, my Uncle Wes told me that Norman, he said he feels like because they both come from a Mormon background, that for some reason Ted felt comfortable with Norman. And of course, Norman, being as smart as he was, he would capitalize on that. Now, like my uncle said, opposite polarities, but on the outside, he said he remembers Ted Bundy, and he said he never talked to him, but he would see him in the hallway back and forth. They'd take him out of the interrogation room, things like that. He would see him. He said he just looked like a college kid that was a great kid. He said you wouldn't think nothing of it. But he said deep down inside of him was that ruthless, murderous killer. And that's why he said they were similar in the fact that on the outside, both men, they appeared one way, but totally different. And one, of course, the opposite pole being the ruthless killer inside, and Norm Chapman, the investigating officer, being a very brilliant, very intelligent, smart detective that was always mistaken from the outward appearance as just a good old country boy. Let's listen to Norm for just a little bit here.
Didn't figure out what it was. I was keying on, but it was his eyes. And it was also the feeling. Once I got around him, I had this feeling I'd never felt before. It was a feeling of, I guess the best way to describe it was frustration and doom. And from then on, when I got this feeling, I knew I'd been around somebody to murder somebody. Not somebody who killed somebody in self-defense. Somebody who had murdered somebody. By this time, everybody in investigation said, Chapman, who do you have? And I said, well, I don't know. Well, how come you don't know? Well, see, we didn't have computers or anything back in the 70s. We had to take him to first appearance for a judge.
Yeah, David, the defendant listed in mind. Is that correct, David?
No, sir.
I thought, sure, him going before the judge, it'd tell who he was. He said, I ain't telling you who I am.
Well, as soon as he comes forth with the correct name or the authorities were able to identify him.
That's Norman over there to the far end of the table.
Because he didn't know who he was. So I bring him out to the police station.
That's Norman there putting him in the car.
His attorneys went in and talked a few minutes, when they called me in. They said he wants to wait till he contacts some people before he releases identification. There's some people he wants to let them know he's in custody. I says, okay. I says,
and Norman
I'll give him 2 hours to call anybody he wants to before I put him back in his cell. I said, they got to call collect because Pensacola Police Department pays for no more phone calls.
And so there you have it there, Norm Chapman and David Lee and their part of the story. And we're not done yet. I'm going to be sharing a little bit more with you here. I'll just kind of let this play here in the background here. This is where, in fact, Carol DeRonch, and forgive me, Carol, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong there. She was one of the few people that ever survived. Well, she was actually kidnapped by Ted Bundy and lived to tell about it after he had handcuffed her and was ready to try to take her. She did escape. Amazing story what happened there to her, and thank God she did escape and lived to see another day. And that was back in 1974. What I do want to share with you, though, and that's going to be, let's see, I think we're going to have it in this video footage here.
Pensacola authorities are still assessing.
This is actually a news clip here of when Ted Bundy, that's Norm Chapman there walking alongside Ted. And Ted, just like some happy-go-lucky college boy there, going to court. And he did have a degree I believe, in sociology or psychology. I forget which one at the time there. And he's being taken to the courthouse there. But Ted Bundy, there's I'm going to share with you now part of the story that has never been told. And I will have to say allegedly at this point here, because I can't back it up, but it's what I heard with people that I was working with when I worked with one of those 3-letter alphabet agencies there. And in fact, one of the men that was the hitman for our government specifically had been sent to assassinate Castro at one point. Many times we had agents go down there to assassinate Castro without success, of course. And but one of the things that was shared with me at that time there were two things that have never been told about the Ted Bundy case. And that was, and I got this from two different agents. We were actually in Tallahassee, Florida one night. And when this was being shared with me, that they had already suspected that he may be in Florida. They knew he was on the run. And so when they say that Florida never knew anything about it, well, the college may not have known about it. There's Mr. David Lee again right there. But the college, Florida State may have not have known, but government officials did know. They did suspect that Ted Bundy was near in our state and that Florida State could be one of his next targets for a victim. And surveillance was being done at the university, Florida State University. And when he was captured, and of course they had found out that he had killed these two girls in this one dorm. Two of them survived. Two of them died. They were bludgeoned to death with a stick, and they actually had to destroy. And so the thing was they destroyed those the video surveillance that was being done, mainly because there was a fear of how the public would perceive this, knowing that Ted Bundy was actually, or that there was already that suspicion. And so allegedly, what I was told and everything is that that Ted Bundy,
this door here,
and this was the dorm where he actually had come in through the back door there, where he killed these girls at there. But this was something they really tried to keep very much under wraps, because they did not want the public knowing that basically they messed up. And quite frankly, it's kind of disturbing to me that happened, because how could they know which place he was going to hit? He did. And so therefore they just didn't have the right building under surveillance where he ended up hitting at. He ended up hitting at a different building altogether. So I don't fault them for that, but I mean, it's kind of sad that they covered up the fact that they were surveilling that, and that never made it to the light of day. The other thing that was shared with me, and I don't know what to think about this, but all I'll say is I'll tell this part of the story. We can say it's alleged, or I will say it's alleged. I don't want to say it's a factual information, but it was told to me by very credible agents at that time that the judge in Tallahassee had given the order. And when I say the order, this isn't a public order. This isn't a order inside the inside ranks there, but was given an order that Ted Bundy was to never enter into his courtroom in Tallahassee. That was made very clear. And they said what was supposed to be done, and this is the alleged story I was told there, was, let him drink, do what he's got to do and everything, but don't let him make a bathroom stop before leaving for Tallahassee. Well, Tallahassee's 2.5, 3 hour drive from Pensacola. And they said when he needs to go to the bathroom, you stop and allow him to make an escape attempt. And, or at least allow him to go to the bathroom, and we'll say he tried to escape, and then he's to be shot. Now I'm going to tell you something that's interesting behind all this. All right? That is, I was told that they did exactly that, and that when Ted went to make a run for it, the officer, excuse me, I'm sorry, when Ted went to go to the bathroom, he didn't even try to make a run for it. He just went to go to the bathroom. The officer, while he wasn't looking, pulled his gun, pulled the trigger, but the gun misfired. Never struck him, or never shot, never fired. And it scared him so bad, he would not take the second attempt. Now, I say this, and the reason why I bring this up is for a couple of reasons. I know that sounds kind of nuts. Why didn't Ted say anything about it? Well, if the gun misfired, in other words, there's no shot, no sound, no nothing, just a little click noise, it could be windy, he may not have ever even heard it. And secondly, because when I talked to my uncle about this whole story and him knowing about this whole case, one of the things that he shared with me was he said Ted never resisted arrest. All right, think about that. He said he never resisted arrest. Now, I already knew that according to David Lee's testimony here, that he did. And that from what he said, he tried to escape. And I don't doubt that a bit in the world. But I don't really understand why it was said that he didn't resist when David Lee said he did. Unless, you know, of course, then again, you got to keep in mind, though, David Lee, and maybe that doesn't make any difference anyway, because if you go here, we go here to David Lee's testimony here. As far as I know, let me just see.
Back as a stolen vehicle. This time the traffic stop was made and a suspicious vehicle behind a building. And as a matter of routine, I was running a check on the tag when it did come back as a stolen vehicle. This time the traffic stop was made and the subject did resist arrest.
Were there shots?
Yes, sir, there were 2 shots fired.
By him and you?
No, sir, just by myself. He wasn't armed. There was no weapon found on him.
Did he resist arrest with violence?
Yes, sir, he did.
What did he do?
Initially, when I was placing the handcuffs
Now,
on him,
David Lee keeps a very sound testimony, and of course, this is 1978. I never looked to see if this was given after Ted Bundy was transported or before. That's why I've wondered about it. I'd have to do a little bit more digging to see if there's any relation to it. Could a story been built up to make it more like that in other words, if they're going to transport him, and of course it could have been even before he's transported, because if you give that story and that's what goes out to the public and they transport him, and then let's say the alleged side of what I've told you about, that he was to never make it to the Tallahassee courtroom, that they could say he was trying to flee and they took him down, then they've already got established a storyline to make sure that he's a risk already. But when my uncle told me about the story, he said it's not true. He never resisted arrest. He said we never had any problem taking him into custody. But I reminded him what David Lee had said, and he told me it's not true. So now, therefore, I kind of wonder, and no fault to Mr. Lee. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I mean, my uncle could have just been misunderstanding and just forgot. I don't know the answer to that, but he's a brilliant man, still very smart, very sharp to this day. But the question is, could that have been something they were building up to be able to carry out the next step? I don't know. I have no idea. And it may have been, like I said, it may have been that just my uncle just, he had in his mind one thing, and it actually was another thing that took place. And that David Lee really did go through the altercation. They did have shots fired, etc. He does have, like you said, there is that mark on the side of his face where it's swollen, where he got smacked in the face. And he said he did that with his revolver. Very consistent. May very well be true. I don't know. These are some odd things. But I wanted to share that with you. Like I said, very interesting how that's affected our own life personally in so many different directions. I thought I'd share that with you here on our Patreon channel. So thank you for listening. And may just add a lot more questions to this story. But, he was put to death, I believe it was 1989, Florida's electric chair. And I know there's a lot of celebration at his death. And I'm not going to weigh in on that subject there. It's just simply that, but he was a very, very, Ted Bundy was definitely a very, very ruthless killer who took many, many lives, many, many innocent lives, I'll add. And
Trouble sleeping.
That's
The judge said,
a
"Okay,"
sad thing
providing
in
he is
itself.
examined by a
So many
physician
lives
first.
taken
Authorities from
innocently,
Washington, Colorado, and Utah
it's such an
reportedly will be
early time in life. And but anyway, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live on our Patreon channel. Have a blessed evening.